40 years on, and 22nd September 1980 is like it was yesterday. Iraqi airstrikes took the country by surprise on that day. 8 major Iranian air bases were targeted, as well as 4 other military installations. It was war, a war that went on for 8 years, ending in chemical attacks on Iranian forces and civilians. Chemical attacks the US was aware of, even aided. But this country decided never again to be a sitting duck. Iran is no new country. Its history of politics and war are as old as civilization itself. Well aware of the importance of defenses, this country kept a well-equipped, well-trained army. After the revolution, however, Iraq imagined it was faced with a vulnerable newborn state. That was not wholly untrue, but Saddam Hussein was surprised as Kitty flashed its claws. Since then, Iran has not stopped. It has been working on its defense industry, on making weapon systems. This is Iran Today, and I'm Leila Faramarzi. Stay with me to honor the past and tread the path Iran was set on by an imposed war. Under a decade ago, CIA files came out proving America's complicity in Saddam Hussein's dirty war on Iran. The chemical attacks, 2/3 of which were launched in the last 18 months of the war. Why would the West aid Ba'athist Iraq? Mr. Momen-Irad is a Tehran University professor and political expert. I'd like you to give me a quick analysis on the Saddam Hussein attack on Iran in the 80s and the support he received from the West. Please look at it from an international law point of view.
حقوق بین الملل در باب مسئولیت دولت‌ها
International law relying on the law on state responsibility adopted in 2001 stipulates that if a state commits an act of aggression, other states that provide assistance or become complicit will be held responsible. Therefore, I think that Western governments are complicit in Saddam's crimes. In international law, we have also the concept of derivative responsibility, according to which any state helping in any way whatsoever an act of aggression, a war crime, crime against humanity, genocide, and the crimes notified by the International Criminal Court or the ICC should be held responsible.
That is to say, collaborators are not just guilty of complicity with Iraq's use of chemical weapons, but engagement in an illegal offensive. How do documents and interviews show US involvement? Top CIA officials, including William J. Casey, Director of Central Intelligence, were informed. They were told about the location of Iraqi chemical weapons assembly plants and Iraq's desperate attempt at making enough mustard agent. They were told that Iraq was about to speed up production of chemical-packed artillery rounds and bombs by buying equipment from Italy. They were also told that Iraq might use nerve agents on Iranian troops and civilians. Mr. Naqvi Hosseini is an ex-MP and authority in matters legal.
کشورهایی مثل انگلیس، فرانسه، چون میراژهای فرانسه خب
Countries like Britain and France, whose Mirage aircraft were the most advanced warplanes used by Saddam Hussein in his war on Iran. Italy, Belgium, and even so-called neutral nations like Switzerland and Sweden aided Saddam Hussein in his war on us. Arab governments were almost unanimously standing with Saddam, ranging from Jordan, who provided $5 billion to Saddam and deployed 5,000 troops on the Iraqi war front, in addition to transferring Western military gear to Iraq via the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. For instance, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia sold altogether 250,000 barrels of oil per day and funneled the money into Saddam's accounts. All oil producers in the region, particularly Arab governments, threw their weight behind Saddam Hussein.
Francona, the Middle East hand who served in the National Security and Defense Intelligence Agencies, said he became aware in 1984 of Iraq's use of chemical weapons against Iran, the use of Taban nerve agents to be exact. The US had firm evidence of Iraqi chemical attacks beginning in 1983. For one, Iran was publicly saying that illegal chemical attacks were being carried out on its forces. In fact, in 1988, during the final days of the imposed war, the United States learned something important through satellite imagery: that Iran was about to gain a major strategic advantage by exploiting a hole in Iraqi defenses. The US was not going to keep that to itself. It informed Iraq of the location of Iranian troops to Iraq, knowing that Ba'athist Iraq would attack with chemical weapons, including the nerve agent sarin. We had Mr. Kazemi Qomi join us in the studio. He was ambassador to Iraq. In spite of all humanitarian claims, the US and West secured Saddam even in his, not only in regular missile attacks on Iran, but in his dirty war against Iran, the chemical strikes on civilians.
The Americans' claims of advocating human rights have proven to be untrue for pundits and free thinkers. Everyone can see the crimes happening in Yemen and in Gaza. In Gaza, the child-killing regime of Israel is committing crimes with US weapons. In Yemen, the weapons used by al-Saud against oppressed people are supplied by the US and Britain. Who can now believe the US's slogans of defending human rights? Even in the streets of cities across the US, you can see that people are treated violently for crying their rightful demands. A major characteristic of the hegemonic power is deception and hypocrisy.
The last of Iraq's chemical attacks was distastefully called the Blessed Ramadan Offensive. Launched just after Persian New Year in April 1988, it has been Iraq's largest ever use of sarin nerve agent. But how and why did this war begin, which ended in a desperate attempt by Iraq at chemical attacks? Saddam Hussein, the Ba'athist president's ambitions and opportunism are clear. But it's not likely he would have waged a war on this country without the flicker of a green light from a world power. In November 1979, a group of revolutionary university students took over the US Embassy compound in Tehran, known since as the Den of Espionage. The US severed diplomatic relations and froze Iran's assets in America. It even held back on delivering fighter jets Iran had paid for. There's more than one reason. Mr. Zanganeh is an international affairs expert and diplomat, joining us by Skype.
They felt that with the victory of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, a new concept would emerge in the region, which would be based on two pillars: opposition to dictatorship and opposition to Western dominance on Muslim nations. Therefore, they decided to use the Ba'athist regime and Saddam Hussein, whom they helped bring to power in 1960, as a tool against the Islamic Republic of Iran. The objective was to draw Iran into a military conflict with a view of undermining the Islamic Republic. That was the main reason for the US's support of Saddam. They didn't want the idea of the Islamic Revolution to spread across nations in the region to weaken Israel's clout with other countries in the region.
Given Western sanctions, Iran had very few places to turn to, for example, to Libya and North Korea, for the simplest military and missile equipment. Also, pre-revolution, the king, Shah Mohammad Reza, may have overspent on arms, partly to help his more powerful allies in paying tribute, referring to America and Britain. But what was actually delivered was a bare necessity that came handy in the war waged on this country. Yes, the Shah had paid up front for a whopping load of military equipment. And most of that equipment was denied to Iran after the revolution. But not just that. Here's what happened to thousands of tanks bought from Britain. Iran had paid for them in the 1970s, but they were sold on to Iraq. So during the war, Iran was turned on by its own tanks, basically.
Throughout the war, access to foreign-made weapons were limited. After the war, there was some openness. But in practice, no important agreement was signed for the purchase of warplanes, missiles, and even defense equipment like tanks. The Islamic Republic had no option but to brace for self-sufficiency in manufacturing weapons. Of course, absolute self-sufficiency never occurs anywhere. Even the US is not fully self-sufficient in weapons manufacturing. It enjoys cooperation from other states. However, the Islamic Republic moved towards self-sufficiency in weapons manufacturing. Missiles was the top priority. Variations of missiles were manufactured gradually. They were designed by Iranian engineers and scientists. Some measures were undertaken in warplane manufacturing. By applying reverse engineering, warplanes were built. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, and arms were manufactured domestically. The Islamic Republic of Iran then turned to IT and cyber power.
Supported from all sides, in September 1980, the Iraqi army stealthily advanced along a broad front into Iran's southwestern Khuzestan province. It captured the city of Khorramshahr, but failed to take Abadan, the important oil refining center. By December of the same year, Iraq had control of 80 to 120 kilometers inside Iran. It was a long-lost dream, but it didn't last long. Iran's counterattacks by conventional and revolutionary armed forces began to loosen Iraq's grip in 1981. Iranians pushed the Iraqis back across the Karun River and then recaptured Khorramshahr in 1982. Summarized as it's got to be, I've more to say on the forces. But for now, a quick look at what other media outlets have to say with Shahrzad.
Hi, my name is Shahrzad Manoucheri, and this week we'll be reviewing the latest update on the anniversary of the Sacred Defense and Iran's stance and advancements today. In an article by Mehr News, we see that ground broken for multi-purpose exhibition of Sacred Defense. The groundbreaking ceremony for the construction operation of permanent multi-purpose exhibition of Sacred Defense was held on Sunday, September 6th, in presence of Commander of the Iranian Army Ground Force Brigadier General Qamar Haydari. Concurrently, the new building the foundation of the preservation of sacred defense works and values of Iranian Army Ground Force was inaugurated at War Veterans Organization of the Army Ground Force. In continuation of the ceremony, newly published books of the Army Ground Forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran were unveiled. Tehran Times reports Resistance Festival announces lineup for Festival of Festivals. A lineup of 12 films have been selected to go on screen in the Festival of Festivals section of the 16th Resistance International Film Festival, the organizers have announced. The Festival of Festivals section plans to review movies produced over the past 40 years on the Islamic Revolution, sacred defense, and resistance. The organizers actually plan to study topics related to the resistance and to the 1980 to 1988 Iran-Iraq War at the 40th anniversary of the beginning of the war, to find out more about the interests of the Sunnites in such topics. The director of the section, Nasser Bakideh, earlier said. The festival is organized every year to commemorate the anniversary of the Sacred Defense. The festival is scheduled to be organized in 2 stages, the first of which will take place during the Sacred Defense Week from September 21st to 28th. The second part of the festival will be held from November 21st to 27th to celebrate the anniversary of Basij Day, which falls on November 25th. In an article by The Iranian, we see Iranian, Chinese, Russian military forces to participate in joint war games. Iranian, Chinese, and Russian military forces will participate in joint military drills codenamed Caucus 2020 late in September, Beijing announced. China's defense ministry made the announcement, saying that troops from Armenia, Belarus, Myanmar, and Pakistan would also participate in the exercises. It added that the exercises, to be held from September 21st to 26th, would focus on defensive tactics, encirclement, and battlefield control and command. The drills have special significance at this important moment when the entire world is fighting the pandemic, the ministry said. Iran, China, and Russia have over the past years increased their military and diplomatic cooperation to counter the United States' hostile policies and extraterritorial presence in their regions. That's all for this segment. We'll see you next week.
Iran, having been boycotted, its air force had to learn how to keep its large fleet of US-built aircraft and helicopters operational, single-handedly. And so this country began establishing its own aerospace industry. Talking of Iran's aerospace industry, that's not all. In fact, the country's main focus in strengthening its defenses has been on missiles. Mr. Aslani says why he thinks missiles matter. Mr. Aslani is a media man with a factual look at current affairs detail. Should the US get to extend the arms embargo, even though it hasn't succeeded so far and it doesn't look like it's going to succeed, would it actually affect Iran, or have we advanced enough for it not to matter?
The breakthrough in missile pinpoint precision is very important. After Iran launched attacks on Daesh or US forces, in addition to a military message, it carried a message about the precision of Iranian missiles. It was a strategy that would definitely worry American authorities, because Iranian missiles today can not only strike the costly American warships deployed in the region, but also their military bases. Iran has not had enough time to invest in warplane manufacturing. Instead, it has invested in missile and unmanned plane manufacturing. Missiles and drones, when combined, can give Iran a power of deterrence.
In honor of National Defense Industry Day, 21st August, Iran displayed 2 new missiles, a ballistic missile with a range of 1,400 kilometers and a cruise missile with a range of 1,000 kilometers. That's going from 300 to 1,000 kilometers in less than 2 years. It's a great achievement born of need. The missiles are named after General Qasem Soleimani and Iraqi militia leader Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. The two were assassinated by the US at Baghdad's International Airport just after New Year 2020. It is from largely inaccurate models, such as the initial Scud-type derivatives, that Iran is now achieving much more accurate models and in larger numbers. For example, the Fateh 313, which was used in the January 2020 strike on US bases in Iraq, in retaliation for the very Soleimani assassination. Iran has succeeded in diversifying its offensive capabilities by developing cruise missiles and strike drones. Should the arms embargo be extended, would it affect our military capabilities? Because Iran has made great advancements, like you said.
قطعاً که تحریم‌های آمریکا جلوی ما رو نمیتونه بگیره.
US sanctions will definitely fail. We have been slapped with tough US sanctions. American and Western officials say the sanctions have been crippling, but we have employed our local know-how and creative young manpower in order to fill our needs. As the proverb goes, necessity is the mother of invention. We needed weapons, but no state would accept to give it to us. Therefore, we try to supply our needs through our own young scientists who are concerned with their nation.
Manufacturing and/or accumulating arms and weapon systems are all very well, but how to wield them with what strategy is no less significant. Iran adopted its defensive deterrent military doctrine in the mid-1980s. That focuses on, yes, the development of long-range ballistic missiles to be used by forces in asymmetric warfare. That involves focus on geography. Iran, after all, is geostrategically located. It astrides waterlines such as the Strait of Hormuz and has within its targeting range energy fields and commercial landmarks, the destruction of which would disrupt the global economy. So much for the world ganging up on us again. Iran is determined to avoid the war of the cities repeating itself, a war in which thousands of Iranian civilians were killed by Iraqi missiles. Thousands meaning tens and hundreds of thousands. Since the 8-year imposed war, Iran has really been working on its defenses. Why so much focus on missiles?
ایران به عنوان یک کشوری که خب میشه گفت قدرت منطقه‌ای
As a regional power, Iran must try to ensure its own security to be able to defend itself in case of any conflict with its regional rivals. However, there are some trans-regional powers that may pose threats. The most important among them is the US, whose presence Iran views as a serious threat. Iran calls for the departure of US forces from the region because their presence causes tensions and insecurity. In order to be on par with the nations equipped with advanced military hardware, including warplanes and warships, Iran has to invest huge military spendings, but it's impossible due to its budget limitations. Therefore, it has to look for Plan B. For this purpose, it can invest in asymmetrical war.
تسلیحات متعارف، جنگنده، ناوهای خب متعددی دارن.
With the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, Iran sensed the more serious threat on its doorstep. By 2005, it developed the Mosaic defense doctrine. It would still focus on naval and air defense, no doubt, to disrupt the enemy's control of sea and air lanes. But it also employs an asymmetrical approach by the IRGC and army, mobilizing a large dispersed force to engage in attritional warfare.
Since 2012, Iran has been adding an offensive dimension by adopting hybrid warfare. Known as the forward defense doctrine, it calls for fighting off opponents outside the country's own borders before they get too close. Its 4 dimensions are advising regional freedom movements, drone and naval guerrilla warfare, cyber capabilities, and intelligence operations.
Anytime you see any of these, just remember hybrid warfare. Unmanned explosive boats, submarines and advanced torpedoes, naval mines, armed and attack UAVs. Unmanned aerial vehicles, that is, anti-ship and land attack cruise missiles, and anti-ship ballistic missiles. Iran has developed a fully homegrown missile industry and manufactured various solid and liquid propellant missiles, although the range of the projectiles has been restricted to 2,000 kilometers, considering the country's needs and defense policies. Iran is out to increase its output and boost the quality of various missiles with high maneuverability. More than 90% of the arms demands are supplied domestically with the help of 5,700 private companies. 655 of these companies are knowledge-based firms, according to Defense Minister Brigadier General Hatami.
Talking of Iran's military advances, are they advanced enough for it to make no difference to this country if the US does get to renew the arms embargo on Iran?
Arms sales constitute a lucrative market which may be compared with the oil market. Many countries are gaining big revenue from military sales. For its part, the Islamic Republic of Iran has made major military achievements over the past 40 years. Our surface-to-surface, surface-to-sea and surface-to-air missiles, tanks and other sectors, we have achieved a lot. But sanctions prevent us from supplying them on the market. However, if the sanctions are lifted, which should be lifted as provided for in the Iran nuclear deal, Iran would face no restrictions in selling arms across the region.
With over 80 million population, Iran is one of the most populated countries in West Asia, with the largest armed forces in the region. That's over 1 million active and reserve personnel. Now, military independence is warranted by having your own equipment as well as your own people to strategize and put the equipment to use.
Given all the trouble instigated by the US, surely Iran can't be blamed for having worked so much on its defenses since the 8-year war.
No country, no establishment seeking independence will ever agree to tie its security and defense power, national dignity and sovereignty to any foreign power and element. Any country tying its power to another one will suffer humiliation. I give you a clear example. Today, postmodern and extra-industrialized Europe is not independent in realistic terms because of its security and economic dependence on the US. Europe can make no international decision outside the US's willpower. It is because Europe's security depends on the US.
And that's our tale of war, woe, and hard work. Lots more tales on lots more topics coming up, so do watch at the same times next week and each week after. Thanks for being with us this time, and don't forget to leave your comments and topic requests. Bye for now.